Hi everyone, this is Debbie Vornholt with Common Sense Landlording. Today we're going to talk about tenants and utility bills. Does your lease require the tenants to pay the utility bills? This is common in my area unless it's an apartment, for example. Maybe like in our apartments, we pay for the water and the tenant pays for the gas and the electric. And not all landlords require this, I do understand that. But if you are a landlord that does require that, there is a process that you need to follow to make sure that your tenant understands this. And then what do you do when they basically fall off the wagon and don't pay their own utilities? So I have several procedures in place for when the tenant doesn't pay. First of all, I put in my property listing that the tenant is responsible for the utilities. Or for example, on my apartments, I state very clearly that the landlord pays for the water and the tenant will pay for the gas and the electric. Make it very clear when someone looks at this property that they are going to be responsible for that, because not everyone is going to be able to easily afford the utilities. And you don't want to have someone that actually signs a lease and then they're like, oh, I didn't know I had to pay the utilities. I didn't budget for that. So understand that not everyone will be able to understand utilities or be able to pay for utilities, be able to afford utilities. So your lease also needs to cover this. And I cover several things. First of all, my lease specifically says that the tenant must put the utilities into their name within a certain span of time. Typically, I will allow them 3 to 5 business days, kind of depends on how everything falls. You also need to list in the lease the repercussions for when the tenant doesn't put the utilities in their name. And then on the day the lease is signed, I go ahead and call the utility company, and 5 days out, I will go ahead and have the utilities scheduled to shut off. And when I review the lease with the tenant, I tell them this. I say, look, you have until this date to get the utilities into your name, and I'm going to call when you leave here and have the utilities taken out of our name. There have been cases where the tenant sits right there in front of me, in cases when they were allowed in the office, and they change the utilities into their name right then and there, and that's great. I also have a move-in form with a checklist, and that includes the name and phone number for the utility companies. Here, I'm lucky, the gas and the electric is one company. In other states, the gas will be one company, the electric will be one company, and the water will be a different company. I also provide other things like the trash services in the area if they have to schedule that, cable services providers. I don't get anything out of that, but at least it makes it easier for them to get everything switched out of their name very quickly. Then I always follow up with the utility company. I've had several cases over the years where I follow my process and then I'm expecting a final bill and it either doesn't come for a while, or I log onto the system or into the system to look at the bills and it's still in our name. And what has happened is the utility company shows up to turn off the utilities in this case, and the tenant has forgotten to call and they say, oh, just give me 24 hours and I'll get it put in my name. And then they don't do that. So the utility company has been nice, and they, for some reason, sometimes they don't go back out there. I don't understand why that is, since I put in the order. So always follow up and check on that, or you could be stuck with a big bill, or at least dealing with the bill while you're dealing with the tenant getting it paid. Landlord reverts are something that the utility companies love here. They love it because when the tenant quits paying the utilities, or they're just too late, which the water company here is terrible about. If the tenant is 4 or 5 days late, they just revert it back to the landlord. Even without the landlord revert, it's quick and easy to do if you like that, if you want to know that the utilities are not going to go off. And that could work in your favor if you are, for example, renovating the property and you don't want the utilities to go off. It can also be a big problem in the winter if your gas and electric go off and your water's still on. So, but that would really be the only good time that I can think to do that. So it is good and bad. It's bad because if your tenant doesn't pay the bill, they're just going to automatically revert back to you. So And also, if you have a lot of properties, it can be hard to kind of remember who's supposed to be paying what, because I've got several commercial properties where we are required to pay the utilities. It's just part of the lease. So if you've just got a couple properties, it won't be that hard to remember who pays what, you or the tenant. I do maintain a utility spreadsheet. I list every property, the date that I called for service, the date that I turned it off, and then I list who I spoke to, just so that I kind of have a reference. It makes it easier when something gets put into your name by accident. You can pull up that spreadsheet and say, okay, wait a minute. This isn't supposed to be in my name. And it makes it easier to track when you turn them on and off. It's a tremendous help for me because I have a lot of properties. So if you get a bill for a tenant, add it to your spreadsheet for tracking reasons. I would then call the utility company and say, look, there's a tenant in the property. They always require a copy of the lease, and they'll send it back over to them. I say, look, I'm not paying this bill. You need to send it to the tenant. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So keep track of that. Then I would go ahead and proactively add the bill to the tenant's ledger. And then I call the tenant and I say, look, the utilities have been put in the company name. This is not allowed. You need to call right now and have them put back in your name, or I'm going to call and have them shut off. I hate to have utilities shut off. I just don't like that. But I will put a note on my Google Calendar. If today is Tuesday, I will put a note on my calendar to call back tomorrow and make sure the tenant has scheduled that to be put back in their name. If they don't, I go ahead and have them turned off. The utility company can be difficult in some cases. They don't like to do that. I just tell them I'm not paying them, turn them off. And we've had cases where tenants have stolen the utilities. I tell them they've pulled the meters before. Sometimes you have to do that. And don't accept the rent until these people pay you for the utilities that have gotten put in your name, because it's really hard to not have that bill paid. You're going to eventually have to pay that bill, but I don't take rent until the tenant has actually paid me for the bill, and then I pay the bill because it is their bill. And this is a training issue. Some of your tenants are going to not so much because they don't have money. Some of them have trouble keeping track of their bills and just paying. It's a skill set issue. I always notify the tenant immediately, and I tell them they're in breach of their lease. And I go ahead and send out a cease and desist. In many cases, that is enough to snap them back to reality and make them understand that they are going to be evicted if they don't get this situation resolved. You don't want to take the easy route, the nice route. I'm not telling you to be rude to them, but you need to make them understand that you have policies and procedures and you will enforce them every single time. Many times doing this the first time, it'll just nip it in the bud. It won't happen anymore. So again, add it to the tenants, their spreadsheet, their ledger, and don't accept the rent until they pay the bill. And then if they don't pay or they give you issues, you've already sent the cease and desist, go ahead and move for eviction. I have a landlord friend who's having the same problem. The guy keeps calling and saying, well, my furnace doesn't work. I have no hot water. He's never had the utilities turned on. So she is in the process. She sent the cease and desist, and she is in the process of filing for eviction. Understand that if you do that and they go ahead and have the utilities put on, that will stop the eviction, but it does at least get put on their credit and they know that you're very, very serious. Your lease also needs to be addressed, because my lease, for example, states that any monies paid go towards paying any other cost. If the utilities have been put in our name and I've billed it to the tenant, if they pay their rent, sometimes they'll pay online, and anything that they pay and it gets accepted, it goes towards all the other costs. If they have late fees, anything else, address those first. And then what's left is rent, because remember that you cannot evict someone for unpaid utility bills. You can't evict for late fees. You can only evict for rent, unpaid rent. So be sure that your lease is in line with this so that you have an easier time holding these people's feet to the fire, so to speak. Again, I always like to hear from y'all if you've ever had this happen. This seems to be a serious problem. I've had it happen over the years. It does help to nip this in the bud quickly and let them know that you do have policies and procedures. And at the end of the day, you may have to get rid of this tenant. You may have to evict this tenant. Sometimes they don't pay the bill. Maybe they don't have the money. I had a tenant one time that she just let it go and let it go, and the bill got to be over $1,000. And I found out she was living without water in the property. And I said, that's unacceptable. You have to have water on. And I moved to evict her, and I did evict her. So tell me about your experiences. I'd love to hear that. We are all in this business together. Some days it's fun, some days it's not. Some days we just want to pull our hair out. How did it turn out? And whatever resolution you came to, would you do that again? You can connect with me at commonsenselandlording.com. Leave your comments out there. And you all have a great day and good luck in all your landlording endeavors.